Somewhere outside a battery plant in China, a single purchase order just quietly broke every record the energy industry has ever kept. Not for lithium, not for anything the industry saw coming. One order for 60 gigawatt hours of a battery that most experts were calling a dead end just 2 years ago. To put that number in a size you can actually picture, 60 gigawatt hours is roughly enough stored energy to charge every smartphone on the planet at the same moment, all at once. And the company behind this order isn't some scrappy startup chasing headlines. It's the largest battery manufacturer on Earth. What makes this story stranger still is the material sitting at the center of the battery itself. It's cheap, it's common, it's so unremarkable that you probably have some in your kitchen cabinet right now. A battery built around ordinary salt just became the biggest story in energy, and getting here took 30 years of science, billions of dollars in bets that didn't pay off for decades, and one stubborn material problem that stumped researchers for 40 straight years. If stories like this are your thing, hit that like button before we start. These videos take a genuine amount of work to put together, and subscribing means you won't miss what we cover next. By the time we're done, you'll understand exactly what made this breakthrough possible, why it took the world this long to get here, and why the stuff sitting in your salt shaker might quietly be one of the most important materials on the planet right now. To understand why a sodium battery matters this much, you first have to understand just how completely lithium took over the world of portable power. Rewind to before the early 90s, and the batteries people relied on every day were heavy, clunky, and drained fast. A camcorder battery gave you maybe an hour before it died. Laptops were thick, awkward bricks that could barely survive a single meeting before someone had to go hunting for an outlet. The idea of a phone thin enough to slide into your pocket and last an entire day felt like science fiction. Those older batteries held a fraction of the energy lithium could store and weighed far more doing it, which is part of why an 80s camcorder felt like you were hauling around a small suitcase just to film a birthday party. The shift to lithium wasn't a minor upgrade, it was a total reimagining of what a battery could be. Energy storage roughly tripled compared to what came before. Devices shrank, phones got smart, electric cars stopped being a concept sketched on a whiteboard and became something you could actually buy and drive off a lot. The wireless earbuds sitting in people's ears right now, the laptops thin enough to fit in a jacket pocket, the electric vehicles quietly rolling down highways. None of it exists without lithium chemistry making it possible first. Lithium earned that dominance because of two properties working together. First, lithium particles are among the smallest and lightest of any element used in battery design, so you can cram an enormous number of them into a very small space, and more particles packed in means more stored energy per kilogram. Second, lithium has an unusually strong natural pull to push electrical current through a circuit. Put those two traits together, and for 30 straight years, nothing else on the periodic table could seriously compete with it. Not sodium, not zinc, not any of the other candidates chemists had experimented with along the way. So the whole industry kept building on top of it. Factories scaled up, billions of dollars poured in. Researchers spent decades fine-tuning the same chemistry instead of exploring anything new, chasing incremental gains in energy density year after year. And somewhere along the way, the industry simply stopped looking around for alternatives and kept driving straight down the lithium road. That's what happens when a technology works well enough for long enough. People stop asking whether something better exists. Funding for alternatives dries up. Research departments get quietly reassigned to work on the thing that already works. And that complacency is exactly when the cracks start quietly forming underneath everything, usually long before anyone in charge is willing to admit it. Those cracks became impossible to ignore in 2016, when Samsung released a flagship phone called the Galaxy Note 7. The early reviews were glowing, pre-orders poured in, and then, within weeks, the phone started catching fire in people's pockets, on airplane seats, on bedside tables while people slept just a few feet away. Airlines banned the device outright. Samsung eventually killed the entire product line, a disaster that cost the company roughly $5 billion and became one of the most talked about product failures in consumer electronics history. Most people blame Samsung directly, and Samsung did make real engineering mistakes in how that battery was designed. But here's what the coverage mostly missed. The underlying danger was never unique to that phone. It was sitting quietly inside every lithium battery ever made. The liquid electrolyte that carries energy between the two ends of a lithium cell is genuinely flammable, combustible under the wrong conditions. If a cell overheats, gets punctured, or charges too aggressively, that liquid can ignite. Once one cell catches fire, the heat radiating off it raises the temperature of every cell beside it, and those ignite too, spreading like dominoes inside a sealed container, each one triggering the next faster than any cooling system can respond. Engineers have a clinical term for it. Everybody else just calls it a disaster. This hasn't faded with better engineering either. As of 2026, lithium battery fires have overtaken electrical wiring as the leading cause of fatal fires in New York City. That's not a statistic from a decade ago. That's the current reality in one of the most technologically advanced cities on Earth. A city with strict fire codes and a fire department that responds in minutes. And lithium batteries are still winning that fight. And then there's what cold weather does to a lithium battery. When temperatures drop below freezing, the charged particles inside a lithium cell stop moving smoothly and start depositing along the inner walls as tiny, jagged metallic spikes. Those spikes grow a little more with every charge cycle. If they grow long enough to bridge the two ends of the battery, they create a short circuit, which generates heat almost instantly. And heat inside a lithium cell only tends to move in one direction. Even when the spikes never grow large enough to short anything out, the performance hit from cold weather alone is severe. At the freezing point, a lithium battery typically loses between 20 and 40% of its usable range, simply because the temperature dropped. For someone driving an electric vehicle through a Canadian winter, or in Norway, or in northern China, that can mean losing over 100 kilometers of range on a single cold morning, right when they need it most, and right when a stranded car is at its most dangerous. None of this was hidden. Engineers documented it for decades. They built smarter thermal management, wrote better battery software, added layers of insulation and cooling channels to try to buy themselves a margin of safety. But the core chemistry underneath never changed. And the reason it stayed the same brings us to a vulnerability that had nothing to do with the science at all. Between 2020 and 2022, the price of the core lithium raw material shot up by a factor of 8, not 8%, 8 times more expensive in 2 years. Then, in 2023, the market swung the other way, and prices collapsed by more than 70% in a single year. The industry had built the foundation of the clean energy transition on top of a commodity that behaved like a meme stock, wildly unpredictable and completely outside anyone's control. For car manufacturers trying to hit affordable price targets and governments trying to build real energy independence, this was the moment the cracks became impossible to explain away. Something had to give, and the answer had been sitting quietly in a research paper since the year 2000. Long before lithium showed up on anyone's radar, scientists in the 1960s were already exploring a different element as the future of battery technology: sodium. It sits directly below lithium on the periodic table, behaves in a chemically similar way, and happens to be one of the most abundant elements on the planet. It's literally in table salt. You can pull it out of the ocean, out of the ground, out of practically every kitchen on Earth, which is a strange thing to say about a material that might end up powering millions of cars. The first high-energy rechargeable battery ever built, developed by Ford back in 1966, actually ran on sodium. It was impressive as a proof of concept, but it had one flaw that made it impractical. It needed to operate at roughly 300 degrees Celsius just to function, hot enough to melt lead. Fascinating as a lab demonstration, not something you could reasonably put under the hood of a family car heading to the grocery store. Then, in 1972, a researcher named Stanley Whittingham figured out how to make a lithium battery work at room temperature. And in that moment, lithium leapt far ahead, and nearly every dollar of research funding on the planet followed right behind it. By the time Sony released the first commercial lithium battery in 1991, the momentum was locked in. Over the following decades, more than $1 trillion flowed into lithium. Sodium got left sitting on a shelf, not because anyone proved it was worse in theory, but because every ounce of momentum, every grant, every lab was pointed somewhere else. Sodium also had one specific technical flaw nobody could crack for decades. Sodium particles are roughly 35% bigger than lithium particles. Inside a battery, particles need to slide in and out of a storage material thousands of times without wrecking it. The storage material lithium relies on, graphite, has perfectly even, precisely spaced layers, and lithium particles slot between them the way a key slides into a lock, clean and exact, thousands of times over without damage. Sodium particles are simply too large for that. Every time one tried to force its way in, it pushed the layers apart and permanently warped the structure. After a few hundred charge cycles, the battery was essentially useless, degraded to a fraction of its original capacity. That single problem kept sodium out of serious commercial consideration for more than 40 years, no matter how many labs took a run at it, until a team in Canada stumbled onto something nobody expected and quietly changed the direction of the entire industry. Back in the year 2000, researchers discovered a form of carbon that looked and behaved nothing like the graphite used in lithium batteries. Normal graphite, zoomed in at the atomic level, looks like a perfectly stacked deck of cards, every layer parallel, evenly spaced. Sodium particles are too big to slide between those cards without wrecking them. Hard carbon is the opposite. It's made by heating organic material, plant waste, agricultural byproducts, even glucose, to between 1,000 and 1,400 degrees Celsius inside a sealed container with no oxygen present. The carbon atoms that come out are frozen in a permanently chaotic arrangement, irregular gaps, tiny pockets of varying size, no orderly layers, just a dense, messy structure full of spaces big enough to comfortably house sodium particles without breaking apart over time. For the first time in 40 years, sodium had a material it could actually work with. But a discovery in a lab and a product ready for mass production are two very different things. Hard carbon is porous, and that same irregular structure that makes it useful also makes it act like a sponge for moisture. Even a trace of water inside a battery cell reacts with the electrolyte and produces gases that slowly destroy the cell from within. At lab scale, that's manageable, something a careful researcher can control with clean room conditions. At the scale of manufacturing millions of batteries, it's a serious problem that has to be solved completely, or the whole thing falls apart on the factory floor. This is where CATL entered the story in a way nobody else was willing to match. CATL, the largest battery manufacturer on the planet, committed roughly $1.5 billion over 10 years to turning hard carbon from a promising academic finding into a commercially reliable product. Their first major breakthrough was reworking the surface chemistry of the hard carbon, replacing the parts that naturally attract water with compounds engineered to repel it. Their second breakthrough was controlling the size of those internal pockets during manufacturing with precision down to the scale of a single atom. Make the pockets too small, and sodium can't move in and out efficiently. Make them too large, and you're wasting space that could be storing more charge. Getting that balance right, consistently, at enormous industrial scale, took years of work and a level of investment most companies weren't prepared to make, let alone sustain for a decade with no guaranteed payoff. The result is a battery called the Naxtra, and what it delivers has genuinely surprised even people who were following its development closely. In a real production vehicle, the Naxtra provides over 500 kilometers of range on a single charge, with an 80% charge taking just 15 minutes. These are real performance figures from a battery already being manufactured and deployed at scale, right now, not projections from a slide deck at a conference. The lifespan sets a new standard entirely. The Naxtra handles more than 10,000 full charge and discharge cycles before meaningful degradation begins, roughly 3 times the lifespan of the lithium iron phosphate cells it competes with most directly. Charge it once a day without skipping, and it would still be performing reliably 27 years later, which is longer than most people keep a car in the first place. Cold weather is where sodium does something lithium simply can't match. The liquid inside the Naxtra stays fluid at temperatures as low as -58 degrees Celsius. At -40, the battery still holds 90% of its full charge capacity. A lithium battery at that same temperature is barely functioning, losing a third or more of its range from the cold alone. For electric vehicle owners in real northern winters, that's not a footnote in a spec sheet. That's the difference between a car that starts every morning and one that fails you on the coldest day of the year. Then there's the price, and this might be the number that changes everything. CATL is producing sodium-ion cells at around $19 per kilowatt-hour. Lithium-ion cells typically run between $55 and $70 per kilowatt-hour. That's not a small gap. That's a fundamentally different cost structure. And, unlike lithium, sodium isn't concentrated in a handful of countries. No single government holds leverage over it, and no sudden shortage can send prices multiplying overnight. For manufacturers trying to make electric vehicles affordable, and governments trying to build infrastructure that isn't hostage to commodity swings, that stability is worth as much as the lower price itself. But here's the question everyone eventually asks: does this mean lithium is finished? The honest answer is more interesting than yes or no. Sodium-ion batteries carry one limitation they can't fully escape, and it comes down to physics. Because sodium particles are heavier and larger than lithium particles, there's a ceiling on how much energy you can pack into a given weight. For electric aircraft, where every extra gram costs range and payload, that ceiling matters enormously. For consumer electronics, where a battery has to squeeze into almost no spare volume, lithium will almost certainly stay dominant for years to come. What CATL is actually building toward isn't a story where one chemistry defeats the other. It's a partnership, each chemistry deployed exactly where it excels. They've already built an electric vehicle battery pack that splits its storage into 2 zones, one sodium, one lithium, with software managing both in real time. When it's cold and the lithium cells struggle, the sodium zone takes the load. On a long highway drive where maximum range matters most, lithium steps up. Neither chemistry gets pushed past what it does well, and the car performs better than either could manage alone. Now think back to that opening number, the 60 gigawatt-hour deal that broke every record. CATL shipped approximately 122 gigawatt-hours of total energy storage products across all of 2025. This single sodium-ion order represents roughly half of that entire year's output, for a technology that wasn't even in commercial production 12 months before the deal was signed. That's not a cautious bet from a buyer hedging their options. That's a signal that someone with a great deal to lose is genuinely convinced this chemistry works at scale. And underneath all of it sits a lesson worth sitting with. The hard carbon research that made this battery possible was published in the year 2000. The science sat in academic journals for more than 2 decades, cited occasionally, mostly ignored. Serious investment didn't surge towards sodium until 2022, almost exactly when lithium prices exploded and then collapsed, and the fragility of the supply chain became impossible to explain away. The problems with lithium were never hidden. They were in the research literature for decades. But when a dominant technology keeps delivering good enough results and the profits keep flowing, entire industries develop a strong habit of not looking too hard for something better. Change requires a reason bigger than the comfort of staying the same. The sodium-ion battery didn't come out of nowhere. It sat in labs and research papers for over 20 years, waiting for the conditions that would finally force the world to pay attention. Those conditions arrived because lithium made them arrive, by becoming too expensive, too volatile, and too geographically concentrated to keep ignoring the alternative sitting quietly right below it on the periodic table the whole time. The future of energy was in your salt shaker all along. If this video gave you something new to think about, the like button is right there, and it genuinely helps this channel more than most people realize. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you're the first to know when the next one drops. Here's my question for you. If a sodium battery electric car cost half the price of a lithium one and worked better in winter, would you actually buy it? Let me know in the comments below.